The child's laugh echoed across the dusty main street of Copper Ridge, and every head turned to stare, not at the boy, though his sun-bleached hair and gap-toothed grin were charming enough, but at the woman holding his hand. Clara Matthews had returned after 18 months, and the impossible had happened. She walked with her chin high, her worn blue dress clean and mended, her steps measured and deliberate. The boy, no more than 3 years old, skipped beside her, chattering about something only she could hear. But it was her eyes that stopped conversations mid-sentence. Where once there had been shame and defeat, now burned something fierce and unbreakable. "That can't be Clara," whispered Mrs. Henderson from the mercantile steps. "That woman was barren as a salt flat." The whispers followed her like tumbleweeds, gathering speed and venom. Clara had been the town's cruelest joke, the banker's daughter who couldn't give her husband children, divorced and disgraced, then shipped off as a mail-order bride to some desperate cowboy in the Dakota Territory. The good folks of Copper Ridge had laughed behind their hands, certain she'd be back within the month, broken and childless as ever. But here she stood, living proof that sometimes the impossible becomes inevitable. Sheriff Morrison stepped into the street, his badge catching the afternoon sun. His weathered face bore the expression of a man who'd seen enough surprises for one lifetime, yet this one left him speechless. Behind him, the town's gossips pressed closer to the saloon windows, their faces twisted with curiosity and disbelief. "Clara," Morrison said, tipping his hat, "folks said you might be coming through." "Sheriff." Her voice carried a strength that hadn't been there before. "Just passing through to collect what's mine." The boy looked up at the tall man with the star on his chest, unafraid. "Mama, is this where you used to live?" The word mama hit the gathered crowd like a thunderclap. Impossible. The doctors had been clear. Clara Matthews could never bear children. Yet, here stood evidence to the contrary, a living, breathing contradiction to everything they'd believed. Morrison knelt to the boy's level. "What's your name, son?" "Tommy," the boy replied proudly. "Tommy Matthews Carson. My papa says I'm going to be tall like him." Carson. The name hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, carrying with it questions that demanded answers and implications that threatened to shatter everything Copper Ridge thought it knew about Clara Matthews and her mysterious 18 months away. The banker's office felt smaller than Clara remembered. Her father, William Matthews, sat behind his mahogany desk, like a judge preparing to deliver a death sentence. His hair had gone completely gray since she'd left, and new lines creased his face, lines that deepened when he looked at Tommy, who sat quietly in the corner, absorbed in a wooden horse Clara had carved for him. "This is some kind of trick," Matthews said, not bothering with pleasantries. "You think you can waltz back here with some foundling and—" "He's not a foundling." Clara's voice cut through his accusations like a blade. "He's my son." "Impossible. The doctors were wrong." She placed a worn envelope on his desk. "Zeke Carson adopted him legally, made him ours. Every paper filed proper with the territorial court." Matthews opened the envelope with trembling fingers, scanning the documents within. His face grew paler with each line. Birth certificate, adoption papers, marriage certificate, all bearing official seals and signatures, all proving that Clara Matthews had indeed become Clara Carson, and that Tommy was legally, irrevocably her son. This Carson fellow," Matthews stammered. "What manner of man takes in a barren woman and gives her another man's child?" Clara's hand instinctively went to the simple gold band on her finger. "A good one, better than this town deserves to know." Outside, the crowd had grown, faces pressed against the office windows, straining to hear every word. The scandal was delicious. The town's most pitiable failure had returned transformed, carrying proof of miracles they couldn't explain or accept. Tommy looked up from his toy. "Mama, why is that man angry?" "Because sometimes people don't understand that families come in all shapes, sweetheart." Matthews leaned back in his chair, his mind working through the implications. If Clara had truly found happiness, if she'd built a life beyond their small, judgmental world, what did that say about the people who'd cast her out? What did it say about him? "You can't stay here," he said finally. "The talk, the questions, it'll tear this town apart." "I'm not staying." Clara stood, smoothing her dress. "I came for my mother's jewelry. The pieces you promised would be mine, Clara, and to show them," she continued, nodding toward the window where curious faces peered in, "that their jokes didn't break me. that sometimes what they call impossible is just waiting for the right person to make it real. The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Clara could see riders approaching. 3 men in dusty trail clothes, their faces grim with purpose. The lead rider bore a marshal's badge, and the look in his eyes suggested this wasn't a social visit. The marshal's spurs rang against the wooden steps like a funeral bell. Marshal Jake Whitmore was a man carved from granite and disappointment, his reputation for tracking fugitives across 3 territories preceding him like a shadow. When he pushed through the bank's front door, conversations died, and the air itself seemed to thicken. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat brim. His eyes found Tommy immediately, studying the boy's face with an intensity that made Clara's blood run cold. "I'm looking for a woman traveling with a young boy. About 3 years old, blonde hair," answers to Tommy. Clara's hand found Tommy's shoulder, pulling him closer. "What business would that be of yours, Marshal?" The boys wanted for questioning in connection with the murder of Jacob Thornton up in Medicine Bow. Whitmore's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Along with the woman who took him." The room erupted in whispers. Matthews gripped his desk so hard his knuckles went white. Through the windows, Clara could see the crowd pressing closer, their earlier curiosity transformed into something hungrier, more dangerous. "Now, hold on," Matthews began, but Whitmore silenced him with a look. The boy was seen leaving Thornton's homestead the night he was killed, blood on his clothes, according to witnesses. The woman who took him, Clara Carson, formerly Matthews, is wanted as an accessory. Tommy pressed against Clara's leg, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere without understanding its cause. "Mama, it's all right, sweetheart," Clara whispered, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. Whitmore stepped closer. "I have a warrant for your arrest, Mrs. Carson, and custody papers for the boy. He's to be returned to his blood family in Wyoming. Over my dead body." The words left Clara's lips before she could stop them, carrying with them 18 months of hard-won strength and fierce maternal love. "That can be arranged," Whitmore replied coldly. Sheriff Morrison chose that moment to enter, his hand resting meaningfully on his sidearm. "Marshal Whitmore, didn't expect to see you in my town." "Official business, Sheriff. Stand aside." "Now, that depends." Morrison's weathered face bore the expression of a man weighing souls on invisible scales. "See, I've known Clara since she was knee-high to a grasshopper, and I'm having trouble believing she'd hurt a fly, let alone commit murder." Outside, more riders approached. The marshal's men, Clara realized, her throat tightening. They'd surrounded the building, cutting off any escape. Through the window she could see townspeople scattering, some fleeing to safety, others gathering at a respectful distance to witness whatever came next. Tommy tugged at her dress. "Mama, I want to go home now. Home." The word carried the weight of everything she'd built, everything she stood to lose. Somewhere in the Dakota Territory, Zeke Carson was probably wondering why his wife and son hadn't returned from their journey. He'd be worried sick, ready to ride through hell itself to bring them home. But first, she had to make sure they lived long enough to see him again. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring until Tommy spoke again, his small voice cutting through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. "I didn't mean to make Mr. Thornton fall down." Every adult in the room went statue still. Whitmore knelt to Tommy's level, his harsh features softening slightly in the presence of a child's honesty. "Tell me what happened, son." Clara started to protest, but Tommy stepped forward, his wooden horse clutched in his small hands. "Mr. Thornton was yelling at the lady. She was crying real loud, and there was red on her face." "What lady?" Morrison asked gently. "The scared lady. She lived in the little house behind his big house." Tommy's eyes grew wide with memory. "Mr. Thornton was hitting her with his belt. She fell down and couldn't get up." Clara's breath caught. She'd heard rumors about Thornton, whispers of a man who kept women like property, but she'd never imagined. "I threw my horse at him," Tommy continued, holding up the carved toy. "Right at his head, like Papa Zeke taught me to throw rocks at coyotes. But Mr. Thornton stumbled backward and hit his head on the fireplace thing." The wooden horse was heavy, Clara realized. Carved from solid oak by Zeke's patient hands, it could easily stun a man if thrown hard enough, and a stunned man stumbling backward toward a stone hearth. "The scared lady got up and ran away," Tommy finished. "She told me to run too, so I did. I ran all the way to the creek where Mama was washing clothes. Whitmore's expression had shifted entirely. "Mrs. Carson, why didn't you report this to the authorities?" Clara's hand trembled as she smoothed Tommy's hair. "Because I knew how it would look. A 3-year-old boy, an accident, a dead man with money and influence. Who would believe us?" "The woman who ran," Morrison said thoughtfully. "What did she look like, Tommy?" "Pretty, but sad. She had dark hair and a hurt arm. She wore a torn yellow dress." Whitmore and Morrison exchanged looks. Every lawman in the territory knew about the women who disappeared around Thornton's ranch, the ones who arrived desperate and left in pine boxes, or didn't leave at all. "Marshal," Morrison said carefully, "there's been talk about Thornton for years. Nothing that would stick in court, but talk nonetheless." Clara felt something shift in the room's atmosphere, a subtle change in the way the men looked at her and Tommy. No longer fugitives, but witnesses to something far darker than anyone had imagined. "Mama," Tommy said, tugging at her dress again, "can we go home now? I miss Papa Zeke." The simple words hung in the air like a prayer. Home, family, the things that mattered more than gossip or judgment, or the cruel jokes of small-minded people. Whitmore stood slowly, his hand moving away from his gun. "Mrs. Carson, I'm going to need you and the boy to come with me to Medicine Bow, but not as prisoners, as witnesses. That woman Tommy described. We've been looking for her for months." Outside, the crowd pressed closer to the windows, hungry for resolution. But inside the banker's office, something else was happening. Truth was emerging from shadow, and with it, the possibility of justice for those who'd had no voice. Clara lifted Tommy into her arms, his small body warm and solid against her chest. Whatever came next, they would face it together. 3 months later, the trial in Medicine Bow became the stuff of legend. The woman in the yellow dress, Sarah Mills, had been found hiding in a miners' camp, her testimony corroborating Tommy's account in devastating detail. Jacob Thornton, it emerged, had been running a network of human trafficking that stretched across 3 territories, preying on desperate women with nowhere else to turn. Tommy's thrown wooden horse had saved Sarah's life and exposed a criminal empire that had operated in shadow for years. The boy became an unlikely hero, his innocent act of protection rippling outward to free dozens of women and bring justice to countless families. Clara stood on the courthouse steps, Tommy's hand in hers, watching the crowd disperse. Marshal Whittem, approached, his earlier hardness replaced by something approaching respect. "Mrs. Carson, I owe you an apology, both of you. You were doing your job, Marshal. I was making assumptions." He knelt to Tommy's level. "Son, that was a mighty brave thing you did. Most grown men wouldn't have had the courage." Tommy beamed. "Papa Zeke says protecting people is what makes you strong, not hurting them. Your Papa Zeke sounds like a wise man." "He is, and he makes the best pancakes in all of Dakota Territory." The marshal chuckled, tipping his hat to Clara. "Ma'am, you've got yourself quite a boy there." "Yes," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "I do." As Whitmore walked away, Sheriff Morrison approached. Behind him, Clara was surprised to see her father, William Matthews, his face bearing an expression she'd never seen before, something that might have been pride. "Clara," Matthews said quietly, "I came to make sure you were all right." "We're fine, Papa." The word came easier than she'd expected. He knelt beside Tommy, who studied him with curious eyes. "Young man, I believe I owe you an apology as well. And your mother. I let fear make me forget what family really means." Tommy considered this gravely. "Mama says sometimes people forget things when they're scared, but Papa Zeke says forgetting doesn't mean the love goes away." Matthew's eyes filled with tears he'd been holding back for months. "Your Papa Zeke is a very smart man." "The smartest," Tommy agreed solemnly. Later, as the afternoon train whistle echoed across the plains, Clara and Tommy settled into their seats for the journey home. Through the window, she could see the vast expanse of Dakota Territory stretching toward the horizon where Zeke would be waiting. Tommy curled up against her side, his wooden horse, now famous throughout the territory, clutched in his arms. "Mama, when we get home, can we make Papa Zeke a cake to celebrate coming home?" "Of course, sweetheart." "And Mama?" "Yes. Next time someone makes fun of you, I'm going to throw my horse at them too." Clara laughed, the sound rich and free. "Oh, Tommy, I don't think we'll need to worry about that anymore. As the train carried them toward home, Clara reflected on the 18 months that had transformed her from the town joke into something stronger. She'd learned that family wasn't about blood or biology, but about choice and love and the courage to protect what mattered most. Years later, when Tommy was grown and had children of his own, he would tell them about the wooden horse that changed everything, about the scared lady in the yellow dress, and about the day his mama taught an entire territory that sometimes miracles come disguised as impossibilities. But that afternoon, riding the rails toward home, Clara Carson simply held her son close and watched the endless sky stretch out before them, carrying them toward the life they'd built together, not through blood, but through love, courage, and the unshakable belief that families are made, not born. The train's whistle sang across the prairie, a song of homecoming that echoed long after the locomotive had disappeared into the golden distance. Stories like this aren't just told, they're felt. If you felt it too, subscribe and stay with us.